Let's be honest. Most of us feel lonely at one time or another throughout our lives for many different reasons. Like you, I've been curious about my loneliness. Is it normal? Are there others that feel this way? Should I be embarrassed to feel lonely when from the outside my life seems great? To learn more about loneliness in all its forms, I'll speak with experts on our show On Loneliness, a video series about coping with feeling lonely created by the Roots of Loneliness Project, a first of its kind resource that deeply explores over 100 types of loneliness to help you gain powerful insights and feel less alone.
People think, oh, Black women are okay. Oh, they're fine. They don't need support. They don't need as much help. They don't need to be vulnerable. It doesn't allow us to really have those moments of weakness and vulnerability because we are not allowed to.
Maiya Lanae is an entrepreneur, educator, and artist. As a university lecturer, she works at the intersection of public and holistic health. She is now launching her health and wellness business for women of color called Hey Girl Health. Maiya is also a DJ. Can you please talk about a bit more of what you do in terms of helping people connect to each other?
Mm-hmm. So much of the work that I do is around health, and that's a broad definition of health, right? So it's not only your personal health, like I always say, eating kale and doing Soul Cycle, but it's also community health. How can communities thrive and communities be healthy? So, I am a university lecturer, and in my classes, I teach my students about the importance of having things, when you do have those feelings of loneliness or isolation, like how can you connect? Who can you call? Where can you go? Can you go to a dance class? Can you do art? Are there people that you can connect to online? It's very, very important to have folks connect. And also in the business that I'm starting, called Hey Girl Health, I'm working with women of color, and connection is definitely something that I'm going to be, you know, teaching them how to do and supporting them with doing, because it's not just, like I said, it's not just about what you eat, but it's also about who's around you and the people that can uplift you as well, and support you in uplifting yourself.
Are there specific challenges that people from different places bring? As somebody who's like from a South Asian background, for example, I know that, I can't really talk about loneliness, or I can't really talk about depression because these are things that are not part of the culture.
Mhm.
So are there some of those challenges that you have to face when you are trying to speak to, let's say, many people from these communities?
Mhm. So thank you for bringing that up. So that's a very timely question for me, because in one of my classes, we just had a class on mental health and what the connection is between mental health and culture and identity, and how a lot of times in our cultures, especially in communities of color, especially in immigrant communities as well, it's just not done. You don't talk about mental health. You don't talk about your problems. You don't talk about loneliness. You just do, because a lot of us here are just trying to survive or just trying to feed our families. And so there's no time to talk about any kind of mental health challenges or any kind of loneliness that's happening. And so for me, in all of the work that I do, I always bring that cultural piece in there, because the way that we define what is healthy, what is mental health, and what is quite frankly normal, is not necessarily inclusive of cultural differences. And so I think it's very important to address those cultural differences, and not to make those cultures a monolith. So for example, when you say people of color, that's putting a whole lot of people in one pot, right? So if you're, like you were talking about, if you're South Asian versus if you're South American, you have two completely different cultural understandings of what it means to be healthy, right? So for me, it's very important to ask what those differences are, and what is it that makes people feel included. How do people define culture? And really, I'm using something called cultural humility, where you're really being humble and you're asking them, hey, what is your experience? And instead of trying to tell them what their experience is, asking them what their experience is, and then going from there.
Do you think we should be trying to get rid of loneliness, though?
I don't think loneliness is necessarily a bad thing. Sometimes, when you feel lonely, it reminds you of the things that you need in life, or it allows you to just be with yourself. Um, I think when loneliness sort of can get toxic, when you feel isolated and when you feel like you don't have anybody around, I think that's when it kind of can get unhealthy. But I think loneliness is necessary because it provides a contrast. But I think when there's too much loneliness and there's too many of us that are feeling lonely, especially when we have can develop resources or can be in community to not feel that way. I think it's important to kind of see the spectrum of loneliness, if that makes sense. So it's I don't I there's talk about a loneliness epidemic now, right? And I do think that with us being on social media, with us being on our phones all the time, they call it being alone together, right? And so even though you have a million followers on Facebook, Instagram, you still feel lonely because you don't have anybody in your actual space physically to be with. So in that regard, I do think loneliness is an issue, but I don't think being alone is an issue if that's something that you need or where you feel comfortable as well.
What is something that you think we should really be talking about when it comes to loneliness or mental health? Is there something that you feel is not being covered or not being seen? Is there a perception or a view of a certain community that you feel is not being represented?
I think it's very important to recognize that across different cultures, there's a different definition of what loneliness is. So for one culture, loneliness, may be not having anybody around, and for another, it may be, I don't know, not having, a big family. Like, it's defined differently. And I also think that we need to expand our definition of what loneliness is. I think, just in healthcare, we see it time and time again that a lot of research has white males at the base, and when that is the norm, everything else that's different from that deviates from what is defined as the norm. But as for example, as a Black female, I definitely have my own way that I walk through the world. And loneliness is defined very different, at least from the people that I know and the people that I work with, right? So, as a woman of color, you have to, be tough in a certain way. You have to sort of have these survival mechanisms and safety mechanisms in place, almost from birth, because you know that you have to sort of be ready to navigate a world that was not really created for you. So to define loneliness as, a feeling of isolation, a feeling of not having anybody around, it just looks different for different people. And definitely as, for women of color, we find ways to integrate, because we have to be really creative to navigate this world, if that makes sense.
Of course. No, it makes a lot of sense. So thank you so much for sharing that. It's so important, I think, that we always be aware that who created the system and for whom was it created. I'd love to hear more about that.
Yeah, so I think as women of color, like I said, we have a certain set of survival skills, and as Black women especially, we're expected to be tough. We are sort of uplifted as this beacon of strength and resilience. And that kind of puts us in a box where we're expected to be strong, we're expected to be resilient, we're expected to just be able to endure anything. And I think we've really been able to succeed on that front, right? We've been able to just roll with the punches. But with that, I think it lets a lot of people off the hook, honestly. I think that because people think, oh, Black women are okay. Oh, they're fine. They don't need support. They don't need as much help. They don't need to be vulnerable, right? It doesn't allow us to be vulnerable. It doesn't allow us to have weak moments. And you see a lot of Black women, putting up the front that, hey, I'm strong. Hey, I got this. I got this. I got me. I got you. I got us. But it doesn't allow us to really have those moments of weakness and vulnerability because we are not allowed to. And it also, as a society, and I'm going big here, but as a society, I think that there's sort of an unspoken expectation that Black women don't need to be taken care of. And that is really at the root of the work that I'm doing. That no, actually, you do need to be taken care of. Actually, not only do you need to be taken care of, but you have permission to take care of yourself. And that's okay. You don't have to be strong all the time. There's actually this show called Being Mary Jane. And it's about a Black woman who's a journalist in Atlanta, and she's just tough, 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 tough. Like she always, you know, is, no matter what she's going through, no matter what's happening in her family or in her work, she's always pushing through and being tough. But then she has these moments of breakdown, and I see her as the perfect sort of archetype of the strong Black woman, that you have to be a rock all the time and you have to be able to endure anything. And that's what makes you, that is part of your value, right? Because, in America, we have our value system of pull yourself up by your bootstraps. You got to be able to make it, right? So Black women are, I keep hearing the statistic that Black women are one of the most educated groups in the United States, right? 6% of the population. That's saying something, right? We do it no matter what. We're going to get our education, even though our men are in jail, and even though we have to take care of our families and yada, 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 we're still going to do it. And it's so great. And so that story is so great. It's such a powerful story. And yet we have some of the worst health outcomes, right? We have some of the, whether it's low birth rate or whether it's heart disease, we see, that strength and endurance also comes at a cost. And so I think it's really important that we talk about that as well. And it's not only Black women that experience this, but for me, being a Black woman and working a lot with Black women, it's something that I definitely want to elevate and highlight as an issue to be addressed.
Definitely. And I just wanted to know, do you think that, and I know that this is a big systemic issue, but do you think that on an individual level, there's anything we can do, that every individual can do to help each other in this situation, and especially help Black women?
It's a cultural thing. I think that we have to recognize that. I think as a society, we need to recognize our vulnerabilities as much as we do our strengths. The work of Brene Brown has been really powerful in really addressing and highlighting the power of vulnerability and saying, hey, sometimes I can't. Hey, I'm unable, or I need a moment. I need some time. I need to take care of myself. Because what we do is we run ourselves into the ground, and then we take care of ourselves because, something's happened physically with us or something's compromised our health. So I think just as a culture, just in American culture that is, working hard and, working, a 15-hour day and having 2-3 jobs, like that is such a core part of our value system and things that we value. So as Black women, we're just a part of that system. So I think just being able to dialogue and communicate about our vulnerabilities is a great start. I think, just dialoguing among each other, because, we all are very strong, right? And we also should be allowed to have vulnerabilities as well. And let's not discount the systems of oppression that exist, where women of color and Black women are definitely affected with that as well. It's not just something that's happening in our head or on our own. The system was not designed for us. We, are subject to the circumstances that we've been given, and we've been able to do a lot with those circumstances, and we've been able to thrive, but not enough. So, one is huge systemic change that needs to happen, and also us being able to connect with one another and have these conversations and to be vulnerable and to laugh and to have fun and be creative and dance and all those things as well. And to really allow ourselves and each other to explore our full selves and be our full selves and show up with all of who we are, and not just not just specific parts.
Can you share some tips on how we can, find resources?
Definitely what I'm gonna be sharing with my clients in Hey Girl Health is one, just identify what makes you feel good, right? Because for some of us, it's being with a whole lot of people. For some of us, you can just go to a dance class where there's people. You don't necessarily have to befriend anybody. So just first of all, identifying what it means for you to be in community and what it means for you not to feel lonely or to feel like you're included in something. Secondly, finding your tribe, right? So some of us, that could be with activities, it could be meetup groups, it could be just hanging out with friends that maybe it's coworkers, but who do you feel comfortable being around, if you do feel those feelings of loneliness. And also just identifying places where you can connect to nature, connect to yourself, right? So if you like to hike, if you like to swim, if you like to, I always like to encourage folks to get outside as much as you can, because it's not always just people. Sometimes you can just be at a river and you can feel totally integrated, and that's fine as well. So those will be my three top tips.
Maya, thank you so much for this. This was such a pleasure talking to you and learning about all of these amazing things you've got to say.
Thank you so much for having me, Sabrina. This was a wonderful conversation, and I think it's something that is incredibly important for us to talk about.